and I'm going to give you a video presentation about the experiences that I had fighting off an infection that ultimately led to endocarditis. Let me just start by saying I was at the time a 59-year-old woman, very healthy, in excellent condition. I'm 5'5" and weighed 130 pounds, very active, and played a lot of sports, played tennis a few times a week. So very physically fit and in good condition. This all started back in 2011. One evening I started feeling ill, started feeling like I had flu-like symptoms, and my daughter was with me at home, and she was checking on me, and I was supposed to play tennis that night, and I finally called my friends and said I wasn't going to be able to make it, so I canceled. And she kept coming in and checking on me because I was kind of moaning and groaning like a lot of people do when they have the flu. And she said, well, maybe we should take you to the doctor. And I was like, just, kind of feeling more and more sick. And finally, about 3 or 4 hours later, she came in to check on me, and I was basically just staring out into space. So I went from, being alert and communicative to, in several hours, just, being not communicative, not alert, and not even aware of what was going on. So later on, when my husband came home, my daughter said to him that he needed to take me to the hospital, and I convinced him to take me. I went to a local regional hospital where they, at this point, I was just completely out of it. They asked me when I arrived, ma'am, can you tell me your name? And I said, I don't know. And I wasn't joking around. And they started asking me a lot of questions, and I was just basically very non-responsive at that point. So they admitted me. They weren't sure what was going on, but they admitted me to the hospital, and I became hysterical and very loud and screaming and I guess kind of obnoxious, but it wasn't my fault. At any rate, they started running some cultures to try to figure out what was going on, testing my blood. After a couple of days there, they quickly decided that I needed to go to a bigger hospital. So they transferred me to Fairfax Hospital, which has got a very extensive cardiothoracic unit, one of the best in the country. And they then started me on antibiotics, IV antibiotics. At that point, I was getting so sick that they were worried about my breathing and my airway. So they intubated me and sedated me and restrained me. And I was in a special quarantine area where visitors had to be gowned and masked to come in because they had no idea what was going on and they suspected an infectious disease. I stayed that way for about 4 weeks, intubated, sedated, and restrained in the hospital. They finally diagnosed this as an infection. They weren't really sure what it was. They suspected MSSA or some sort of fungal infection, but it was never determined. They could not find any breaks in my skin to sort of get an idea of where this came from, but they kept telling me that it comes from your skin. They then decided that it was getting more serious. I was diagnosed with meningitis and endocarditis. They did echocardiograms and discovered that this colony of bacterial whatever infection was forming on my mitral valve in my heart. And the infection was raging. They were trying to get it under control with antibiotics, but I was still in pretty rough shape. At that point, the cardiologist and the surgeon were communicating, and as I understand it, they were getting into a bit of a heated discussion because the cardiologist was very concerned that if some surgery wasn't done to correct this mitral valve infection, my heart would be damaged even further, and yet the surgeon was reluctant to do the surgery because I was so unstable and still so very, very sick. So there was a little bit of political infighting there. They ultimately decided to go ahead and do the surgery. I had an open heart surgery to replace the mitral valve, and they did that. They replaced it with a bioprosthetic pig valve, porcine. So I started recovering from that. The infection was under control. The surgery went well. It was a very difficult time for my family. I can't really say it was difficult for me because I was really out of it. I was still sedated and really not even in the picture mentally. So I heard all of this secondhand, but it was a very emotional time. They were advising my family about percentages of success, and everybody was quite worried. So I had the surgery, and surgery was successful. They then put me in ultimately a step-down unit as the infection got more under control, and then I was in the process of trying to regain some of my lost function. I mentally was not even all there. After having 4 weeks of fentanyl sedation, my mind was so foggy that I couldn't make the most simple addition. If my husband asked me if I have a nickel and a dime and 2 pennies, how much money do I have? And I couldn't answer that question. I didn't know what year it was. They had to tell me what year it was, and I tried to memorize it every day so that next time they came, I would know it, but I still wasn't able to remember and know what year it was. In addition to the mental lacking, I was not able to, I had no fine motor skills. I couldn't walk. I couldn't pick up a coin from the table without cheating and sliding it off the edge of the table. I couldn't feed myself. My family got quite a laugh out of watching me try to eat as they watched the food dribble down my chin, because I just had no idea where it was. I had no control of my fine motor skills. So I went through a lot of physical and occupational therapy in the hospital there to try to get back some of my skills. And let me tell you, the first few steps that I took after being intubated and sedated for so long were like moving a mountain, so incredibly painful, so incredibly difficult. And I am probably one of the strongest people you'll ever meet, but for me to do that, it was amazingly difficult. It was a very, very difficult time trying to crawl out of that hole. Then I went into another room. I actually had a little accident and fell out of bed, and so they transferred me to another room, which, as it turns out, was a special suite that Dick Cheney had been in, one of our vice presidents, and he had been operated on by the same surgeon that did my surgery, Dr. Alan Spear, who is a really famous heart surgeon, and he started that whole cardiothoracic unit in Fairfax Hospital. After that, I was still very unstable, and but I did recover, from the surgery, and started gaining a little bit of my strength back. I will tell you that that whole myth of use it or lose it that I thought was just a myth. It was totally debunked because I was living proof that everything had wasted away from me. I had lost so much body mass. I looked like a Holocaust victim. I was so thin and had lost so much control. I then went to a rehab facility because I couldn't even go home. And the rehab facility worked with me again with a lot of, physical therapy, occupational therapy, learning how to or trying to be able to comb my hair and brush my teeth. It sounds like such a simple task, but I had to gain the strength and the control to do that. It was so hard. And then walking, and I got very frustrated with this rehab facility because they were limiting how much I could walk to, the hours that they had an assigned therapist, and I wanted to do so much more. So because I'm very motivated, and so I ultimately left the rehab facility and went back home, and from there I had in-home physical therapy coming to work with me, continuing to try to get me walking and lifting some things and strength, giving back some strength, getting some of my body mass back. After the discharge from the rehab facility and after being home for a while, I was doing pretty well. It took me about 3 months to recover and get back to sort of doing some of the same things I was doing. The valve that they put in my heart was doing great, and it did very well for about a year. And after 1 year, the mitral valve just dissolved. My body just dissolved it somehow. It had been functioning very well, and it just I was getting symptoms of shortness of breath and sort of gurgling in my chest, and it was because the valve was kind of falling apart. So I had to have another heart surgery, open heart surgery. This is after 1 year. And once again, they replaced my valve with another bioprosthetic porcine valve, slightly different type, but very similar. And so I recovered from that and started getting back again to my life. And I wasn't, the recovery wasn't as hard because I hadn't been sick, but it's still tough because they basically cut your entire chest open and saw right through the middle of your chest. So I had the second valve in for about another year and a half, about 18 months, and lo and behold, that valve failed as well. And then I had to look at another open heart surgery to replace the valve once again. And it was that was probably the worst one because the surgeons and the physicians advised me that the more you do this, your heart becomes less and less tolerant and can ultimately say, you know what, I don't want to play this game anymore. So I was very distraught, and we once again went through that emotional roller coaster of emotions with my family, not knowing how that was going to end up. But thanks be to God, that surgery went well as well, and I then had a mechanical valve put in because they decided after 2 of these bioprosthetic valves, the mechanical valve is the way to go. I'm now doing great after about 3 years, and the only issue that I have is I have to be very careful because now I have to take warfarin, which is a blood thinner, and when you have a mechanical valve, they have to make sure nothing gets clogged or clotted to it to keep it functioning clearly. And there are some issues associated with taking warfarin because you are much more subject to a brain bleed if you were to like hit your head. So now I always wear a helmet, and I'm also very careful if I ever do hit my head. I did have a concussion once, and I had to go and immediately get a scan, brain scan, to rule out the fact that I didn't have a brain bleed. So I guess the message is that these infections can be very dangerous, and if you know anyone that may be having issues, you might want to check on them, because if my daughter hadn't insisted that I go to the hospital, I probably would have been dead in about a day. That's how fast this was all racing through my system, and thank God it was treated quickly. And from everything I've read, that's an absolutely critical aspect of recovery, is to get these infections under control as quickly as possible. So knock wood, I'm hoping that I'm good to go now and I won't have any more of these heart surgeries or any further infections. I'm very happy to be back to my life, and it was quite an ordeal. Hope none of you ever have to go through that. Anyway, thanks for listening, and have a great life.